that sudden, irresistible urge to buy, to comply, or to return to someone toxic, is it your free will or is it a command? This is the dark psychological paradox of mind control triggers, a technique that bypasses your conscious defenses to create desires.
You know, that question really gets to the very heart of a super subtle but incredibly powerful form of influence. We all love to think we're in the driver's seat, that we're the authors of our own desires. But what if? What if some of our most intense urges aren't actually ours? What if they've been installed, like a little piece of code, just sitting there, waiting for the right cue to run its program? This is the reality of mind control triggers. It's a deliberate tactic, and it's designed to fly completely under the radar of your conscious mind, making you feel like a choice is yours when really it's a pre-programmed response.
So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on this exact mechanism. First, we're going to tackle that illusion of choice. Then, we'll define what this hidden command signal actually is. We'll break down precisely how the trick works. We'll look at why our brains are so vulnerable to it, and this is the most important part, we'll cover how to break that chain and take back your personal autonomy.
All right, let's dive right in with that fundamental question from the top. Free will or command? This is where we start to peel back the layers on this often unseen illusion of choice. See, we all operate day to day assuming that our decisions, especially the ones that feel really personal and deep, come from within us. But that very assumption, well, that's exactly what manipulators count on.
And here's the truly insidious part, the genius of this technique, if you want to call it that. It keeps the feeling of free will completely intact for the person being targeted. You don't feel like you're being forced. You feel a genuine, authentic desire to buy that thing, or to go along with that terrible idea, or to pick up the phone and call that person you know is just wrong for you. The command is essentially laundered through your own emotional system, so it comes out on the other side feeling like it was your idea all along. And that illusion, that's the camouflage that allows this whole thing to go on sometimes for years without ever being spotted.
So what is this hidden signal we're talking about? Let's put a real definition on the psychological tool being used here, because this isn't some kind of magic. It's a methodology. It's a system.
All right, let's get down to the brass tacks here. A mind control trigger is a specific stimulus, and look, this could be anything. A word, a particular phrase, a certain tone of voice, even a small gesture. And its job is to activate a predictable, automated psychological response. But the secret sauce is right there in that last part, exploiting conditioned associations. This is just classic conditioning, straight out of the psychology playbook. Think Pavlov's dogs. You take a neutral signal and you pair it over and over with a powerful emotional or biological response. You do that enough, and pretty soon the signal alone is enough to produce that entire response on command.
And you see these triggers fall into a few common buckets. Emotional triggers are just incredibly powerful. A manipulator might train you to associate their voice with a feeling of validation or a sudden relief from your anxiety. Scarcity triggers, these are everywhere in advertising. Limited time offer. That phrase is designed to create an urgent, automatic desire to act now. And then you have commitment triggers, which prey on our deep-seated need to be consistent. Once they get us to say yes to something tiny, they can use a trigger to push us towards saying yes to something much, much bigger, just so we don't feel like a hypocrite.
Look, the end game here is brutally simple. The entire point of installing a trigger is to create a shortcut that completely bypasses your rational, critical mind. Trying to persuade someone takes work, right? You need logic and evidence and a good argument. A trigger, it needs none of that. It's a backdoor that goes straight to the emotional control panel, making you act long before you ever get a chance to think. The goal is pure efficiency, predictability, and, of course, control.
So, how is this programming actually installed? How does some external cue manage to become one of your internal desires? This brings us to the real core of this explainer. Let's expose the step-by-step mechanism.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It sounds like something out of science fiction, that someone could literally program a desire into your mind without you ever knowing. But the process is actually very systematic, it's subtle, and it exploits the very way our brains were designed to learn in the first place.
And what's so fascinating here is how it's just a predictable three-stage process. It all starts with step 1, associative conditioning. The manipulator takes something totally neutral. Let's use an innocent-sounding phrase like, "You and I, we just get each other." And they repeatedly pair it with a moment of intense emotional payoff, like validation or relief. Over time, your brain forges this powerful unconscious link. Then comes step 2, trigger activation. Later on, maybe days or weeks later, when they want something from you, they just deploy that phrase. Bam! Your brain, having been conditioned, doesn't stop to think. It just automatically floods your system with the chemicals of that good feeling, dopamine, oxytocin, you name it. And that leads you right into step 3, the automated response. Suddenly you feel this overwhelming urge to act in a way that gets you more of that good feeling. You're driven to agree, to buy, to comply, all to satisfy a chemically induced urge that you mistake for your very own desire.
Now, to really get why this is so effective, you gotta look at the brain wiring. Think of your rational mind, your prefrontal cortex, like a careful librarian. It's powerful, but it's slow. It has to pull books off the shelf, analyze things, weigh the pros and cons. A triggered response, though, it takes a shortcut. The stimulus goes straight to the brain's emotional centers, like the amygdala. This is the brain's fire alarm system. It's fast, it's automatic, it's built for survival. It doesn't analyze, it just reacts. The trigger is specifically designed to hit that fast pathway, completely leapfrogging the slow, logical one.
Okay, so understanding the how is one thing, but why does the brain even fall for this? What are the psychological drivers here for both the person setting the trap and the person walking right into it? This is where we have to look at both the motive and the vulnerability.
And this table really illustrates the dark symmetry of this whole relationship. On the manipulator's side, the primary driver is a deep need for subjugation and control. And what they exploit is the brain's natural laziness, its tendency to create shortcuts to save energy. On the target side, the driver is a biological compulsion to satisfy that chemically induced emotion. And the vulnerability they're exploiting, well, it could be something like learned helplessness, where your past experiences have kind of taught you that you have no control anyway, or it could just be the brain's incredibly powerful and primitive reward processing system, which is always going to chase pleasure and run from pain.
This visual really just says it all, doesn't it? Take a look at the difference in response time. It's not even a fair fight. A triggered impulse is practically instant. That emotional reaction happens in a fraction of a second. Rational thought, on the other hand, has to play catch-up. But by the time it even gets its shoes on, the triggered response has already won the race. This is why just using your willpower so often fails. You're trying to use a slow, conscious tool to stop a lightning-fast, unconscious process. It's a total neurological mismatch.
Okay, so we've really dissected the problem, and I know it can feel a little heavy, a bit bleak. But knowledge is the first step toward defense. So now, we get to pivot from analysis to empowerment. How do you break the chain? This is the counter-operation.
The absolute foundation of any defense starts with this one principle. Radical deconditioning requires radical awareness. You simply cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. The whole power of these triggers comes from their invisibility, their ability to operate in the shadows of your subconscious. So the very first step is to make a conscious decision to drag them kicking and screaming into the light through meticulous self-observation.
And the crucial point is, there is a clear, actionable strategy to fight back. It breaks down into 3 steps. First, you have to identify the trigger response chain. This means you become a detective of your own mind. You keep a journal. The second you feel that sudden, powerful urge, you stop and you document everything. What exact words were just said? What was the tone of voice? What happened right before you felt that? Second, you create what's called a cognitive interrupter. This is a pre-planned, disruptive thought. So when you feel the trigger hit, you consciously deploy it. It can be as simple as telling yourself, this is the trigger, this is not my desire, and then taking 3 slow, deep breaths. Your goal is to just create a tiny gap, a little bit of space where your rational mind can get a foothold. And finally, step 3, you practice systematic deconditioning. In a safe, controlled way, you can expose yourself to the trigger without acting on the compulsion. And every single time you do that, you weaken that neurological link. You are actively retraining your brain.
All of this brings us to our conclusion. The final verdict on how you move from being controlled by these hidden commands to truly and fundamentally reclaiming your own autonomy. If you take only one single thing away from this entire explainer, please let it be this. The trigger's power depends entirely on it being an unconscious process. The second you can consciously see it and label it, the moment you can think, there it is, that's the trigger phrase, you've fundamentally changed the entire neurological event. You've moved the reaction out of those fast, automatic emotional centers and into the slow, analytical prefrontal cortex. You are no longer just a passenger along for the ride. Simply by naming the tactic, you break the chain of command.
So, let's bring it all home. First, we've seen that the mind trick that quietly controls your desires isn't some form of dark magic. It's a direct exploitation of associative conditioning. Then, we restated how that pattern works. An external trigger activates a chemically induced automated response that completely bypasses your rational mind, making a command feel like your own choice. But the most important takeaway is this: awareness breaks the loop. By identifying the trigger chain and using a cognitive interrupter, you dismantle the command and you reclaim your autonomy.
And really, that's the whole point. This isn't just theory, it's a practical tool. It's a new lens you can use to see your own reactions in your interactions with others. So the final question really is for you. Now that you can see the command signal, now that you know what to look for, what choices will you make differently?